Hello, we are the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or ACAM for short.
Yeah. Okay. So while you do that, just to continue my introductory notes, as Barry was saying, I've been working for the past 20 years in addiction and focusing on different aspects, going from alcohol and substance substance misuse at the Institute of Psychiatry, and worked on several international projects. And today's sessions brings together some of this knowledge, but I kept it very simple in the sense that I have a very few slides rather than a very long, comprehensive academic presentation. And I have also included some polls with the aim of making this presentation a bit more interactive, and also try to understand where you're coming from, what is your knowledge on specific topics, and try to also integrate your answers in my presentations. So I think we are set now. I can see the welcome page. And actually, we haven't highlighted the learning, but the session today is around it's been organized around three aspects. One is to understand the trends and prevalence of substance use among young people. The second session, this part of it, will look into the myths and around addiction and substance use. And then the last bit will focus on risk and potential consequences of using substance of any type in these age groups. Okay, so the first poll, this was my original question about the most popular, but if you can actually say what is the second most popular drug rather than the first one, that will probably be more informative to me. So not the most popular, but the second most popular drug in young people. And I will define young people as 16 to 24 years old. So if you can answer this short poll, that will be useful. Okay. Good. I can see that you are already well informed on substance use in this age group. So if we can move in, I think the poll is closed. So if we can move to the next slide on prevalence. And this data that I'm showing here comes from the drug misuse in England and Wales survey that is being conducted from the Office for National Statistics. And I think Matthew is posting the links to the surveys and reports if you are interested to read more about this data. So what we see here is that there's quite a high prevalence of substance use in the age group between 16 and 24 years old, especially if you look at the last year. So this is around 1 in 5 people. When we look at the specific substances like the Class A drugs, the proportion reduces a little, but still very high. around 7.5% of people. And class A drugs, I don't know how familiar you are with the class system in the UK. The class A drugs are the most technically the most harmful drugs, and they include substances like cocaine, ecstasy, heroin, LSD, but also magic mushrooms. These are the most popular ones that we tend to include in surveys. And no, I haven't finished yet. But you're too quick on that. So there are a couple of other more points. There is about the use in the last month. So again, the proportion is around 4.3 use in the last month. There is also a second survey that looks at drinking and drug use and smoking in young people, which is carried out by the NHS every 2 years. And there's no data there on my slide, but they also report substance use among 11 to 15 years old. And that's normally in the last report, in the last report has been conducted in 2020. So during the COVID pandemic, showed a reduction in any drug use in the last year compared to the previous survey. So there's been a COVID effect in the last survey. And here again, you can compare your answers with the prevalence of the most commonly used substance in these age groups, and here I'm referring to the 16 to the 24 years old. So cannabis is by far the most popular ones. Laughing gas or nitrous oxide is 8.7, and is in this age group is actually the second most popular substance, and then it is followed by cocaine at 4%, and then ecstasy and ketamine. Those are the other substances that are quite popular in this age group. But normally cocaine is the second most popular substance if you include the larger population and not just the 16 to 24 years old. Okay, so we can move now on to the next substance. And this, again, is taken from the same survey. You can see that over time, substance use has decreased. If we just focus on the top 2 lines that are reflecting the points that I already made in terms of last year use or last month use, you can see there's been a regular decrease since 1995, then when these surveys started, up to 2014, and then it's been either stable or we can see now a slight increase in substance use among this group. And this has been similar to other trends in alcohol consumption as well as smoking. The number of current smokers in this age group has gone down consistently over the last 20-30 years, and now we only have 3% of regular smokers in this age group, which again went down since the last survey in 2018. But what we can see, what we are seeing now in increases is in vaping. So all these small decreases in percentages of smoker has been offset by an increasing number of people vaping. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Which again follows on some new trend. whether you've heard of novel psychoactive substances. These are called NPSs or legal highs. Um, okay, 52% no, 42% yes, and some are not sure. Okay. Um, well, I hope I will give you some more information then, especially to those of you that never heard of novel psychoactive substances. This is a topic that I started researching back in 2002 when I moved to London after my doctorate. And we started looking at the internet as a source of information for substance use. And what we discovered at the time was that there were a lot of websites promoting the use of novel compounds that were not normally seen by addiction specialists. And these were freely available online. And we investigated how they were promoted and how they were marketed and how popular they were among substance users. And what we discovered is that there was a sheer new number of substances coming onto the market every year. And this peaked in 2014, 2015 with an average of 100 compounds every year, so around 2 a week. That has reduced. Since then, we have now in the last 5 years seen an average of 1 new compound per week entering the market. And these compounds are marketed as legal alternative to illicit drugs. And they represent the biggest change in the addiction field because they obviously are, most of these new compounds are unknown, are also unknown in the way on the way that on the effects they might have on people. So the new compounds are not being well known by the users themselves, but they tend to use the internet as a source of information. So there are dedicated websites where people can get information on these new compounds. They get information on the dosages, and they also get information on potential consequences and side effects. And on these slides, you can see here a screenshot from our website selling these compounds. And you can see they are quite sophisticated website where they guarantee the next day delivery. They provide a 100% secure and discreet packaging. They also have a price match guarantee and loyalty points scheme for recurrent user. So there is quite a market out there that is all that developed around the promotion of these novel psychoactive substances. Obviously, this website is no longer there, but they are most of these compounds have been made illegal in 2016 when the UK government introduced the Psychoactive Substances Act, which is essentially a blanket approach to regulate the market of these compounds. And overnight, the majority of websites that were based in the UK closed down. But if you search on Google, you can still find plenty of websites that are promoting these substances online, and they're obviously delivering compounds from other countries where these compounds are still legal. And obviously, there are also the crypto markets where these illegal activities are also happening. So again, there are more than one way of getting hold of these substances. And as I mentioned, these substances are there to, have been promoted as a legal alternative to cocaine or cannabis in particular. But among these substances, the one that you already have identified as a very popular one is the laughing gas, or the nitrous oxide. So if you can have the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a very common sight along, in many streets and parks. You might see a lot of these discarded cartridges in many places nowadays. And in the middle picture, you actually see what is the new trend. So these are larger canisters of nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, that have been they are becoming more popular in the last couple of years. These have entered the market and have been used more regularly. And this, again, is not, nitrous oxide has been around for many centuries. Has been developed and invented in 1772. So it's definitely not a new drug. But a lot of these novel psychoactive substances are not completely new. They've been discovered probably around the beginning of the last century by pharmaceutical companies, but they've never been tested or developed as medicinals, for instance. So they're not completely new. And in this case, nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, was already popular in 19th century Britain as in many respectable and fashionable homes. So not completely new, but it's obviously a new trend. It's something that has been increasing in popularity in the last few years. And the Psychoactive Substances Act essentially there's a loophole in the sense that it is illegal to sell for recreational purposes, but you can obviously still buy it legally if you own a restaurant, or you have a whipped cream dispenser and you want to make your own whipped cream at home. So it's still available online through Amazon and other normal retailers, and which makes it obviously a lot more difficult to regulate and to address its use among this age group. The effects of this substance is mostly consumed for its euphoric and pleasant effects. It also creates a deep, silly voice, which should not be confused with the high-pitched, silly voice that you have when you inhale helium, for instance. And the effects start quite soon, a few seconds after the first breath is inhaled. You will find you will have this pleasant euphoric effects, which last for only a few seconds. And the main concerns that addiction specialists have for this substance is that, especially when these new canisters, larger canisters, have come onto the market, is that the quantity that people are inhaling increases, which might obviously increase the harms long term. So far, the most reported consequences of using laughing gas are around the asphyxiation, and as well as harms from falling and accidental injuries that are caused by loss of consciousness and that is linked with the inhaling of large quantities of nitrous oxide. Okay, we can move on to the next slide, please. So the next one is about common myths. And if you can start looking at the poll and try to look at the what you think are the most common myths that you have encountered in your professional life or your personal life, that would be helpful. I imagine you might also have seen or thought or heard of other common myths about addiction. Unfortunately, addiction is rooted in discrimination and stereotypes. So it is and stigma. So these common myths are quite prevalent. Okay, I think prescription drugs are not addictive. Okay, that's very popular. Followed by everyone who uses drugs becomes addicted, and less so. Some drugs are more harmful than others. Okay, good. I imagine we can pick some of these common myths during the Q&A. But if we just point a few aspects now, especially around these 6 common myths. The first one focuses on addiction mostly affects certain type of people, whether those are criminals or similar myths around this same concept is that people with addiction are bad or need to be punished, or inversely, if you have a stable family or stable job, a family life, you definitely don't get addicted to substances. In reality, as you might imagine, addiction does not discriminate. It can affect anyone, no matter your age, your income, your ethnicity, the family or professions. But there are some genetic, social, and psychological risk factors that can put some people at greater risks. And in my last couple of slides, we look at some of these risk factors. But there's nothing in the person's character that will make them more prone to addiction. And then everyone who uses drugs become addicted. Or similarly, another similar myth could be that addiction is a choice. So we from the slides that I shown earlier on, it is obviously pretty clear that the vast majority of people who use drugs do so for a limited period. If we look at the general population from the 16 to the 59 years old or older, we can see that there's a peak of substance use in the 16 to 24 years old, and that gradually decline. So not everyone that tries or experiment or use even regularly substances will become addicted. But there's still an element of choice, but the choice is not that someone lacks morality or self-discipline. There's a personal choice in obviously deciding to use substance, and then maybe that in the long term might lead to addictions. But the prevailing view in the addiction fields at the moment is that addiction should be seen as a disease, more like a chronic condition like diabetes or asthma, and it links to the second point of you cannot recover from addiction. So obviously addiction, if we embrace this view that is a chronic disease, it is obviously very hard to recover from addiction. Addictions, substance use and addiction affects the way the brain works, and it might be very challenging to recover. But we also know that a lot of people do recover from addictions without formal help of treatment, and we call this natural recovery. So again, there is a bit of a debate even within the addiction field on how much is a personal choice. So how much just willpower will help you out through addiction, or how much this should be seen as a disease, hence even a chronic disease where treatment is there to support you, but also to maintain you in a certain condition. And this is specifically true when you look at the methadone maintenance treatment, for instance, for opioids. And the other point that was mentioned there, probably the most popular one, was on the prescription drugs and how addictive these are compared to illicit drugs. And you rightly pointed out, I don't know if you had this view, but they are equally both harmful, but also dependence-inducing drugs. There are a lot of painkillers, benzos, and amphetamines out there that are prescribed by doctors that can be very addictive, and they are even more addictive than illicit drugs. And for the last point on whether some older drugs are the same or some drugs are more harmful than other, I will comment a bit more in the last two slides that focus exactly on these points on harmfulness of drugs. So if you can move on to the last poll. Yeah, thank you. So which of these risk factors predict addiction? This is, I mean, predicting whether someone will become addicted is quite a hard question to answer. And you can imagine that in reality there is a complex interaction between many factors. Some of those are obviously listed there, and I will be keen to see what you think of these factors. Impulsivity, sensation seeking, peer who are user influence. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, in reality, it is quite difficult to have a proper assessment of how these factors contribute to substance use and addiction. it is almost impossible to have a single study where all these factors are included and studied at length. So what we have is many studies looking at different aspects of it, and the points that are listed here are on these slides are the main factors that have been identified so far. They tend to be organized around individual personal factors, family or external community level factors. And if you look at the individual factors, these are mostly around impulsivity, sensation seeking, and also particularly important is a low perception of risk of drug use. And this is also clearly evident if you look at the alcohol consumption, where many people have a positive, people that have a positive alcohol expectancies and are also sensation seeking. They also, have a larger or greater consumption of alcohol. And we also know that, again, on the psychological factor is that an early start or an early consumption of any drug or tobacco or even alcohol correlates with greater harms later on in life, but also makes it harder for them to stop the substance use. And at the family level, again, we have negligence, poor supervision, and particularly important is whether some of the family member is also a substance user. So those are clear risk factors. And at the community level, having peers using drugs is definitely an important factor, but also having an environment where substance use is condoned is obviously a risk factor, an important risk factor. And then most of the factors can be reverted as protective factors in terms of if someone has a positive outlook of their life, if they look at their own well-being, if they have a parental and in particular also paternal oversight or awareness of what they are doing, and their life is organized around structural activities, but also they are engaged with the school activities, and they have strong religious beliefs. These have been all identified as important protective factors. And lastly, my last slides again focus on the drugs harms, and this goes back to the classification system in the UK, but which is also, I would say, similar in many other countries. The UK is not isolated in this regard. Has a classification system that tends to classify drugs based on their on the possible harm that they have on people. So they go from A, B, and C. As I mentioned earlier, around the substances in the class A drugs, we have heroin, cocaine, and ecstasy. Then a class B substance, the typical one is cannabis. Although cannabis for a brief period of time was also made a class C drug during the Labour government in 2004, some time ago. And then we have class C substances like benzos and anabolic steroid, for instance. But what they also touch, this classification system, is the level of consequences or punishments that you will get if you are supplying or if you are caught in possession of these substances. And what this slide presents is a work from a colleague of mine, Professor David Nutting, and that reorganize the potential harms from drugs based on a number of factors that were either focusing on the individual, and which is now in this slide highlighted as a blue column, or to others, to society. And you can see here that alcohol is by far the most harmful substance, then followed by heroin and crack cocaine, and then it goes down to LSD, buprenorphine, and mushroom or magic mushrooms at the very bottom of the harm scale. And this was quite an important paper in 2010 because highlighted the discrepancy between the classification system and the connected punishment of using these substances to what experts in the field and also therapy, addiction specialists knew about the consequences of using these drugs, with the idea that the system should be rearranged and rethought to address these discrepancies. And that's, I think, all I have to in terms of slides, but I am obviously open to answer all the questions you might have, and to go back to some of the points that I probably didn't cover fully.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. That was very clearly explained, because you explained some very complex stuff and also concepts that I think we as teachers are not familiar with. You made me realize as I listened that lots of my, in inverted commas, knowledge is very much based on what you hear on your TV screens, what you read in newspapers, that often these issues are sensationalized. They are high impact in terms of emotional response. And I think that means we're not always getting truly factual information. We're getting sensationalized information. You want to say?
I would say that unfortunately, addiction is one of those areas that is also very political, where every time there's a change of government, they depends on the party, but it could be that they want to be hard on drugs, so they come up with potential policies that are more harmful than others, and they tend to be very politicized topic, and they shouldn't be, because I'm not fully embracing the disease model, but if you look at the addiction as a disease, then why should we have these discussions at the political level? It should be that it should be more evidence-based, and should be more. You shouldn't really trigger all these emotional responses from party and the electorate.
Thank you. So can I just remind everyone that there is going to be a feedback poll about the session this evening, and we're really grateful, folks, if you could fill that in. We're starting to get some questions coming through now. There's two short ones I want to start off with. One is from Kelly asking, is nitrous oxide addictive? And the second one is to ask a little more clarification around methamphetamines. Is someone saying, is that the street name for speed? Can you clarify those things, please, for us?
Yeah. So the nitrous, or the laughing gas, or the nitrous oxide, well, when you talk about addiction, there are different. One is a physical addiction, and the other one is psychological addiction. So nitrous oxide is also, as I mentioned, is used in food, is used in childbirth. So it's also known as gas and air. If you had a child, you probably used it, and it's not, in that sense, is not addictive, physically addictive. Your body. Now, okay, if you use it in large quantity, the body might respond by requiring with tolerance to the substance. That's the usual mechanism, where you then increase your amount of the substance you want to use to experience the same effects. With laughing gas, that is not evident so far. But what we see is that people will tend to develop a psychological dependence to it. So the need to experience this euphoric effect or pleasant effect. And you could say, why not? I mean, being euphoric is a nice feeling. So, if someone doesn't feel well with their life, they might just enjoy this activity or this substance with friends, and so on. So that would be my answer. I mean, there's not a concern of this substance becoming to be too addictive, developing an addiction per se. But what we have seen in terms of consequences is that people get the risk are more about how you use it. So some people have put a plastic bag on their head, and then they spray the content of the canister inside the bag, and that's where you might knock yourself unconscious slightly, and then you just access. Oh, this is a difficult word for me to say, but asphyxiate in that sense. Yeah. But again, the most common consequence is that people will fall over and injure themselves. So accidental injury or death caused by accidental injury is the most common consequence from people that are using too many of too greater quantity of this gas. And then, yes, on the question on amphetamines, that's what I was referring to in terms of is speed, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we've got some interesting questions starting to come through now, and there's one around drug addiction and younger children.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a rise in the age profile of use of drugs? Change in that?
No, I mean, my first couple of slides had prevalence showing that substance use is going down. The 11 to 15 substance use, again, in the survey that have been carried out, have shown a reduction in substance use. The last one in 2021, as I mentioned earlier, showed an even greater reduction, but that was the COVID year. So, many young people were at home, so the opportunity to use drug or have access to drug was reduced. So we shouldn't really make a lot of that, of that reduction. But as I mentioned, there are other things that are increasing, like vaping, So there might be a bottom line where there's a reduction, but there will never be a situation where we don't have drugs around. So the problem will be how far we can go down that road to a point where the trend will stabilize or have a small increase. But at the moment, from the figure that I have seen, it doesn't look like there's an increase in substance use.
And do you think that county lines and the rise in county lines is having an effect on addiction?
No, not really. I mean, it's more, at least not at the general level, not at population level surveys. Okay, maybe locally, when a county line is established, there might be an effect locally, which is not obviously seen at a population level surveys. You might not see these changes in trend, but undoubtedly, if there is a new market where new substances are taken into new places, then locally there might be an increase in substance use. But it could be that this increase in substance use is again localized around a group of people who are currently using I don't know, let's say they might be using cannabis, and they move from cannabis to the new drug of choice that is being promoted by the county line. Then they move to from that to cocaine, for instance.
Yeah.
So I don't expect a larger increase in user. They probably there might be more risk in the type of substances they have access to. Yeah.
Let me just take you've mentioned cannabis there. So we've actually got a question from a colleague working in further education who's saying that often the young people there talk about their own use of cannabis to ease their anxiety. They believe it's not physically harmful, but don't realize the emotional addiction. What's the long-term impact on their mental health of cannabis use?
Well, cannabis is a substance that has been evolving in terms of potency and harm. So if you were a cannabis user in the 80s, in the 60s, if you are, what you were smoking then is completely different of what you are now buying and smoking. So nowadays we have a stronger variety of cannabis, and we also have synthetic cannabinoids, and also we have what is called a skunk, so a compound that cannabis that doesn't have the CBD, which is the compound and prevent or ameliorate the effects of cannabis. So you have a stronger effect, and the studies that have been conducted at the Institute of Psychiatry, but also elsewhere, have shown that these new forms of cannabis lead to acute psychotic episodes more often than we ever had in the past.
Thank you. And there's a really interesting question come through, and I know from my own conversations with colleagues, particularly in secondary, there is much concern about vaping at the moment. So the question here is about what research has been done on vaping. And this colleague talks about in their school, they've actually lost a 15-year-old student due to a blood clot, and he was a heavy vapor and a drinker, self-medicating due to trauma. And it was thought that the vaping could have been the cause of the blood clot.
Okay. Well, I'm not really sure about the direct link between vaping and blood clot, but vaping again. When I mentioned my early days as a researcher 20 years ago, when we started looking at the internet as a source of information, we also noticed, these new technologies, vaping as a new kind of device, and was just a niche product. But in the last 10 years has obviously evolved. It has become a mainstream product to smoke nicotine, and it's been endorsed by the NHS, by many academics and health professionals, has a safer way of getting your nicotine and to help you quit smoking.
Mm-hmm.
That obviously allowed from big companies to get behind this new trend. And what we have seen now, that the reduction in actual smoking smokers in the 15 in the 11 to 15 year old, for instance, has been offset by people actually starting using vaping more and more often. So you have more regular smokers than ever. So if you look at the adult population, the smokers that want to quit vaping is probably the right thing for them to use as a safer alternative, and also as a tool to stop smoking. But then obviously it creates a situation where also young generations are now seeing vaping as a new things to do. And what we also see is that most people do vape nicotine, but there are new trend also on people's using vaping to actually vape cannabis and other substances. So
right, that's a question that's come through, so please explain.
Yeah. I mean, particularly in Canada, in other US countries or states where cannabis has been decriminalized or legalized, then there are new devices that are being sold that have cannabis or THC inside the liquid rather than nicotine. So these new devices do exist. The liquid that you refill your vaping pipe or your cigarette or device are available online and can be bought everywhere. So also, I don't have specific numbers for the UK, but I know that in Canada, 1/3 of people or young people vaping, they actually do vape cannabis. So it's quite a trendy thing to do over there.
And teachers are really interested to know, particularly those working in secondary education, that if a young person is regularly using or might have used over a weekend, what physical changes might a teacher observe on that Monday morning? Would there be any?
For cannabis, you mean?
Well, if there be any substance.
Well, it depends on the substances, but usually, it could be that. Well, it's a bit difficult to be very specific, but I would say that the normal symptoms you could see, whether they are actually physically present there in the room, because they depends on also on the level of potential tolerance or level of dependence they develop, because withdrawal symptoms can start a few hours after you use a substance and can continue for many hours or in some cases a few days. So it depends on the substances. You're going to be from having shivers to sweating hands to how their eyes are closed and so on. So it's not easy to. I mean, you might possibly say it, but I wouldn't really use that as a kind of a way of identifying people. But for teacher, I would say that the most important protective factors that in the studies that have looked at this is that keep students engaged with school activities is quite important. So if you suspect that someone is has problem with addiction of any kind, the least things, the last things you want to do is to expel them, or to exclude them from a regulated activity. So where they have to come to school, have to engage with activities. So that helps them to well, in a way, it's a protective factor. But if you already have developed an addiction, that level of engagement will probably support your journey out of it as well.
And is weight loss a sign of substance use?
Again?
Is weight loss a sign of substance use? A colleague is asking.
Yes, some substances do inhibit appetite. Some do actually the opposite. Depends on the substance. Some do have that side effect. In many cases, people that attend addiction treatment services, they tend to be very thin. But then again, it could be that they prioritize substance use to food. So it's a combination of things. But some substances do tend to reduce your appetite, and that's also some of the reasons why they are taken on. Some amphetamines, for instance, are slim pills called. In terms of they are there to lose weight.
Okay. Well, we're going to pause the questioning there. I'd like to remind everyone, please make sure you filled in the Survey Monkey, but we'd like to now just launch a short poll that asks you the benefits of that Q&A session that we've just gone through. And I'm so pleased we had time to do that. And thank everyone for the quality of the questions that came through. They were really thoughtful and pertinent questions. So if you could just fill in that poll that's just appeared. Some of you are asking for clarification on certain issues that Jan and I think are probably the issues that the Chartered College will pick up in the Pedagogy in Practice webinar that will actually be taking place, the one that's linked to this issue of substance use that we're discussing this evening. That will take place on the 24th of January 2023. So look out for that and pop that in your diary. 24th of January 2023. So there's some great feedback. Lots of strong support, Paolo, for the sort of things you've said and clarified.
Yeah, I think usually the questions are probably the part where people are expressing, especially these clear questions. They usually are the section where you are still learning a lot from the interaction. Yeah, sure.
So we're going to just pull things together now. If you've been looking at the webinar chat, you'll see that actually Matt has posted in some wonderful links to various resources that are already available to colleagues from ACAM, and again they are free. Remember, again, it's an initiative from Matt, but we've now started a teacher hub, and we've been delighted at the levels of attendance at these events, and we've got some people who come regularly, and we'd like to keep that dialogue with teachers going. ACAM has a vast wealth of knowledge that, yes, it needs translating into teacher talk and into pedagogy, but in terms of a secure evidence base that can inspire some creative pedagogy, then absolutely ACAM is the organization there. So Matt, do you have anything you want to say about the resources available?
No, other than I've just posted the Teachers Hub link into the website. There is, as Barry said, Pedagogy in Practice coming up in January. I think as a matter of course, what we tend to do is we'll automatically transfer people on there. You've obviously got an interest in that. If you specifically don't want to be, then do let us know. We've got a recording of the session. It'll probably take us 24, 48 hours to get that up online. The slides will be shared as well. And when that goes online, I'll also put references to some of the ONS data that Paolo put through as well. So other than that, Barry, just a thanks from here at everyone at ACAM, obviously.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So it just remains for me to thank Matt for coordinating this evening, and particularly our colleague Joan Gray, who does all of the legwork around pulling these webinars together, the briefings, the sort of evaluations at the end. They're all very systematically and deductively evaluated, and that will be a bigger piece of work that ACAM will be looking at, is an evaluation of the impact of these sessions that they've been providing. I want to thank Jan for helping coordinate the questions this evening so efficiently. Thank you very much, Jan. But most of all, I want to thank Paolo, because what you've brought this evening, Paolo, is a wealth of information that isn't common for teachers to get such high quality information. And I loved that you went head on in there for myth busting. I think that's the section where I took most notes, because I realized you were busting the myths that perhaps I carried too. And it just doesn't it just show, though, Paolo, the need for this interdisciplinary dialogue. You have all of this wealth of knowledge as a psychologist, but it isn't always available to teachers. But who has the most contact with young people and developing children? And it's so important, isn't it? I'm sure you'd agree that we have an ongoing dialogue with teachers about the sort of information you have and what could be happening with the children in their classrooms.
Absolutely, it's quite revealing in terms of, you know, looking at the myths. But I have to say, some of the myths are also been caused by the debates that we have within the addiction field, and you know, so you know, I'm not blaming people for having myths, because we are creating some of these myths by having opposite views on what is actually addiction, and some of it has to be, you know, is still an unknown to the field. So we are still learning on what is addiction and what are the genetic component of it, or whether it's personality traits and so on. So there's a lot we need still to learn, and it's not surprised that some of these debates are being developed in myths and so on.
Well, there's lots of thank yous coming through in the chat, Paolo, and as one colleague has said, thank you. An important challenge for our schools and community to tackle, and people that have heard you tonight will feel better to go about undertaking that challenge. Thank you again for your time, your knowledge, and for sharing so openly. Thank you everyone that attended on a very wet autumn evening. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you at future ACAM events. Have a good evening, everyone. Goodbye.
Find out more about becoming an ACAM member and to be part of the advancement of child and adolescent mental health. Visit www.acamh.org.